Hello, good evening, happy Deafblind Awareness Week. What actually is deafblindness? Deafblind Awareness Week exists now to celebrate the birthday of Helen Keller. She is a wonderful woman and role model, and she did so much. But every time I say I'm deafblind and her name comes up, I didn't become an expert on Helen Keller when I was diagnosed. In fact, her being the only model of deafblindness that anybody, including myself for a long time, knew of is part of the reason why I struggled so much with, am I deafblind or not? Do I count? And I still have feelings of imposter syndrome. Just because people don't understand what deafblindness is, and we look to Helen Keller as the role model, so that must be what deafblindness is. And yes, it is, but it's so much more. It is a spectrum. Yes. Just like how deafness is a spectrum, blindness is a spectrum, and visual impairment is a spectrum. Welcome to today's lesson. Basically what it actually means is when a person has a combination of a vision impairment or a sight loss or a hearing impairment or a hearing loss that results in difficulties in communication, accessing information, and mobility. While I'm on the topic, the word impairment is not my favourite, but sadly it is the easiest one to put hearing and sight on the same kind of level and use the same language to talk about both. Perhaps I will make a separate video on why hearing impairment is just a horrible phrase and why nobody really in the deaf community uses it, but sadly we're using it today because deafblindness and language. Deafblindness, in my opinion, is one of the most misunderstood identity labels. People think that in order to be deafblind you have to have severe to profound hearing loss and be legally blind or totally blind. And that is not the case. It is a spectrum, and it includes people with mild hearing loss and mild visual impairment. It is definitely possible to be mildly deafblind. You can also, ironically, be invisibly deafblind. That is, you move through life struggling, but not obviously. You don't need to be deaf and blind. If you use the identity labels hard of hearing and visually impaired, you are still a part of the deafblind community. You can be mild of both. You can be severe of both, you could be profound of both, you could be moderate of both, you can be severe of one and mild of the other. Any combination of conditions or losses that affect your sight and your hearing. We can't just reserve the term deafblind for the worst case scenario, otherwise no one else gets help, no one else gets support, and nobody else can move forward through life in an easier, accessible way. There is a legal definition as of 1995, but I am going to have to read it. A person is regarded as deafblind if their combined sight and hearing impairment cause difficulties with communication, access to information, and mobility. This includes people with progressive sight and hearing loss. So it is a broad spectrum. If it's causing you difficulties, welcome to the community. Deafblindness is also known as another term called dual sensory impairment or multisensory impairment. A lot of people use these terms interchangeably. They are not functioning labels and they do not dictate whether somebody is mild, moderate, severe, profound, any of that. They are just personal preference with a little bit of a twist. So people might use dual sensory impairment or multisensory impairment instead of deafblind, perhaps because their hearing loss isn't really hearing loss. It could be audio processing disorder. You could have visual processing issues but see generally fine and just not be able to process the information, or you just think it more accurately conveys what it actually means to be deafblind, as in two or more of your senses don't really work very well. People who are deafblind use a variety of methods to understand the world around us, but we don't all use these tools. So you don't have to have hearing aids to be deafblind, you don't have to use any sort of cane or assistive technology for sight to be deafblind. You are deafblind enough even if you function without hearing aids and quad bikes and assistive technology and canes. Just because you don't use these things, that doesn't mean that you don't struggle, and that doesn't mean that they don't struggle enough to be considered deafblind. We're not reserving the term deafblind for the worst of the worst. It isn't like that. We're just describing how our senses work and how that impacts how we move through the world. I'm not going to tell you, hey, you're deafblind whether you like it or not. That's not what I'm here for, and I'm also not here to gatekeep deafblindness. Gatekeeping is always bad. You don't have to use the term deaf or blind to be deafblind. The word is just deafblind, but you can be hard of hearing and visually impaired. I'm deaf and visually impaired. The sight side of things is a little more complex. So I'm going to give you a list, and it's not an exhaustive list, but what is a visual impairment? It's not just about your visual acuity. So visual acuity is when you're in the opticians and you've got the chart of letters on the back wall and you read down them and it gives you a number like 2020, 2200, 66, 63. I couldn't tell you mine because I'm long-sighted and the numbers work differently for that. There's a different measurement. But there's more to visual impairment than just visual acuity. Now if you are 2200 or more, you may qualify as blind. Any less than that, you may qualify as visually impaired. But a visual impairment that doesn't look at visual acuity is generally a sight impairment or a vision issue that impacts your vision that isn't corrected by glasses. And that doesn't mean, oh yeah, I could get glasses, but I don't want to. And it includes contact lenses. For example, and this is not an exhaustive list, photophobia, poor night vision, double vision, nystagmus, tunnel vision, loss of peripheral vision, loss of central vision, palinopsia, which I experience, they are all visual impairments and they may not be correctable by glasses. Most people who only struggle with their visual acuity and it is correctable by glasses don't use the word deafblind to describe themselves. Just because that isn't how visual impairment is really defined. So for example, just because you wear glasses and happen to be deaf, that doesn't necessarily make you deafblind. Like, I'm long-sighted, but my long-sightedness is generally corrected by my glasses. My long-sightedness is not what makes me deafblind. What makes me deafblind is my light sensitivity, my night blindness, my double vision, my palinopsia. None of those things are correctable by glasses. I mean, the photophobia is helped by the orange tint, but this is still very bright and I'm still in pain. It just hurts me less. So what is deafblindness? It is a combined hearing and vision impairment that impacts how you move through the world. The one thing I want deaf people to know about deafblindness is there are additional struggles. So somebody who is just deaf at the exact same level as me, which doesn't happen, may have an easier time because with my specific visual impairment, visual snow syndrome, more on that up here, moving hands, I can't see the hands properly, so when people are signing to me, if they're signing especially fast, the faster they go, the blurrier they are. And that can be the case for most people. When you move something really fast, there is a little bit of blurring, I think. Like those pictures on long exposure of glow sticks being waved to make a letter. That's kind of my entire life, but that happens to me at a much slower speed than most other people. So watching hands signing can be difficult. Lip reading is even more difficult. If I'm having a day where I am having double vision on top of that, so for example, I can't, this is really oddly specific, but I can't count stars in the night sky. I can't always count dots on a dice. In the labs, when I was counting cells, that was a struggle, believe me. Very difficult because I couldn't tell you if there's one or two sometimes. So if I ask you as a deaf person to sign slower, please sign slower with no judgment. And the one thing I want blind people to know about deafblindness is we can't just use sound. A lot of the techniques that I have been recommended to try involve sound, so for example voiceover. It doesn't always work for me, and I'm not gonna ever be as proficient in voiceover as other people because I won't hear fast speech. I need my captions on my voiceover. As somebody who's new to the blind community, kind of, it's hard for me to suggest what I want blind people to know about deaf blindness, but I just want them to know that we struggle with sound too. So speak clearly and take our lead. I guess that kind of applies to deaf people too, but instead of speak slowly, it's sign slowly and take our lead. We'll tell you what we need. Another question I had is what goes a long way for you? And that's patience. I won't pick things up the first time. I might ask somebody to read something to me because I can't read it myself, and then I might not hear you reading it, and I just need you to be patient with me. Patience with deafblind people goes a long way, and just respect, and don't compare us all to Helen Keller, because that's not helpful to anyone. So this has been a basic overview on what is deafblindness. I hope this has helped. Happy Deafblind Awareness Week. Don't forget to like this video. If you still have questions or comments, leave them down in my comment section below and I will answer them in a future video. But also probably in the comment section because I can't just leave things alone. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already and ring that notification bell so you get notified every single time I post a new video. Videos go up every Saturday at 6 PM UK time, with at least one bonus video every single month. See ya!